The laughter started low. Not cruel, but confident. A 400-pound sumo wrestler stepped onto the mat, adjusting his stance, rolling his shoulders once as if to remind everyone in the room exactly how much mass he carried. Across from him stood Keanu Reeves. Calm, still, unreadable. No dramatic music, no flashing cameras, no announcer hyping the moment, just a training space, a small invited audience, and a visible size difference that nobody could ignore. The sumo wrestler smirked slightly and made a quiet comment about weight classes. A few people chuckled. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't hostile, but it was dismissive. On paper, the matchup looked uneven. One man built like a wall, trained in balance, explosive forward drive, and the art of overwhelming force. The other, leaner, lighter, known more for cinematic combat roles than competitive rings. At least, that's what some assumed. But here's what made the room shift. Keanu didn't react. No defensive body language, no forced smile, no attempt to prove anything. He simply bowed and waited. The air changed because confidence that doesn't rush feels different. The sumo wrestler stepped closer, testing space with a heavy forward movement. Not striking, just occupying ground. His presence alone seemed to compress the mat. A whisper moved through the crowd. This won't take long. That's when it happened. Not a strike, not a shove. A subtle foot adjustment, a slight angle change, the kind of movement you only notice if you're trained to see it. And suddenly, what looked like a mismatch started to feel like a puzzle. The larger man shifted his weight again, more committed this time, more pressure, more certainty, but certainty can become predictability, and predictability can be redirected. The laughter stopped, not because anyone fell, but because everyone sensed something building beneath the surface, something technical, deliberate and controlled. Power was present, but so was patience. And patience, when timed correctly, doesn't need to be loud. Before the story moves any further, something needs to be clear. This was not a sanctioned bout, not a ranked match. Not a spectacle designed for headlines. It was a controlled martial arts session, structured, supervised, and focused on technical exchange. Moments like this can easily be exaggerated online. A single clip taken out of context can turn a respectful drill into a fictional rivalry. But those who were present described something far more disciplined. The 400-pound sumo wrestler didn't step onto that mat by accident. Sumo training is built on centuries of refinement, balance, leverage, lower body power, explosive engagement from a grounded stance. It is not simply about weight. It is about how that weight is distributed and driven forward with precision. In sumo, the objective is simple. Break balance, control space, and force your opponent outside the boundary. But achieving that requires extraordinary footwork, hip, alignment, and timing. At elite levels, it becomes a study of micro-adjustments, subtle shifts that determine whether pressure succeeds or collapses. On the other side stood Keanu Reeves. Many know him from action films, particularly the John Wick franchise. What fewer people appreciate is the intensity and consistency of his preparation. For those roles, Reeves trained extensively in judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and tactical movement systems. The goal wasn't just choreography. It was functional, realism under pressure, different background, different purpose, same foundation, discipline. That's what made this session compelling. The sumo wrestler's advantage was obvious. Mass, rooted stance, explosive forward engagement. Reeves' advantage was less visible. Angles, leverage, and economy of motion. One system pressures directly, the other redirects. Neither is inherently superior. They operate under different rule sets and objectives. That's important. In a professional sumo ring, the rule structure favors forward dominance and boundary control. In grappling systems, like judo or jiu-jitsu, balance manipulation and redirection often become central tools. So this wasn't about proving which art wins. It was about how principles translate. Observers described the opening exchanges as measured. No reckless charges, no ego-driven attempts to overwhelm. The sumo wrestler applied gradual pressure, testing stance stability, checking posture, feeling for resistance. Reeves didn't meet that force head-on. He adjusted spacing. When pressure increased, he rotated slightly off-center. When distance collapsed, he lowered his base. When grip contact occurred, he changed hand position rather than muscling through. To untrained eyes, it may have looked subtle. But to practitioners, it was a conversation without words. Force asked a question. Structure answered it. And that's what made the atmosphere shift from curiosity to attention. Because this wasn't a movie scene. There were no retakes, no scripted outcome, just physics, body awareness, and mutual respect. The larger athlete wasn't careless. His movements were controlled, disciplined, deliberate. He wasn't trying to injure or dominate. He was applying authentic pressure within safe parameters. Reeves wasn't trying to prove anything either. No theatrical gestures. No crowd-playing reactions, just presence. When two trained individuals operate without ego, the dynamic changes. It stops being about spectacle and starts becoming about problem-solving, and that's what this moment truly represented. Not actor versus athlete, not size versus skill. Not reputation versus reality. It was a demonstration of how different systems interpret balance. And as the exchanges grew slightly sharper, still controlled, still respectful, one question began to form quietly in the minds of everyone. Watching. When two disciplines meet outside their usual arena, who is really being tested, the body or the adaptability of the mind? They stepped closer again. Not rushed, not reckless, measured. The mat felt smaller now, not physically, but psychologically. Distance matters in controlled exchanges, and distance was closing. The 400-pound sumo wrestler lowered his stance slightly, widening his base. His toes angled outward for stability. His breathing stayed steady, but his intent became clearer. Forward pressure. Not explosive yet. Just incremental. He moved, like a tide coming in, relentless, gradual, certain. Across from him, Keanu Reeves shifted his lead foot a few inches off-center, barely noticeable to casual observers. But that small angle adjustment changed the geometry of the exchange. Pressure thrives on straight lines. Angles interrupt them. The first solid contact came through hand fighting, grip checks, wrist, control attempts, collar positioning. Nothing dramatic, but every touch carried information. The sumo wrestler tested structure, a firm push to gauge resistance, a weight transfer to feel balance response. When he leaned in, the force was undeniable. Hundreds of pounds transferred through grounded hips into forward motion. The kind of pressure that doesn't feel aggressive, it feels inevitable. Several spectators instinctively leaned back as if they were the ones being crowded. But Reeves didn't retreat in panic. He yielded just enough. That distinction matters. There's a difference between backing up and redirecting. His rear foot slid diagonally. His shoulders rotated slightly. Instead of absorbing the full line of force, he redirected its trajectory by degrees. Small degrees. The sumo wrestler increased. Commitment. He stepped deeper. This time, the push wasn't exploratory. It was assertive. A surge designed to collapse posture. For a split second, it looked overwhelming. The crowd held its breath. Because when mass accelerates, hesitation becomes dangerous. But timing doesn't require size, it requires awareness. Reeves adjusted his grip, lowering his center of gravity while pivoting on the ball of his lead foot. The shift wasn't flashy. It wasn't explosive. It was efficient. The larger man felt resistance change. And that's when tension truly rose. Not because someone was losing, but because both realized this was no longer a light exchange. It was a genuine test of principle. The sumo wrestler attempted to square the angle again, hips forward, chest aligned, reclaiming dominant positioning. His strength was evident, even controlled, it carried authority. But with each surge forward, Reeves subtly disrupted alignment. A half step outside the shoulder line, a downward pull combined with a lateral shift, a reset before pressure could fully root. Observers stopped whispering. Phones lowered. No one wanted to miss the details now. Sweat formed along foreheads, not from exhaustion, but concentration. This was technical tension, the kind practitioners recognize immediately. One mistake in balance, one misread in timing, and momentum could flip dramatically. The larger athlete committed once more, this time with clearer intent to close distance fully and force engagement chest to chest, a space where raw mass becomes far more decisive. The room felt compressed, sound faded, foot against mat, breath, grip tension. In that narrowing pocket of space, something was about to give, not necessarily a body, but control of momentum. Because at this level, exchanges aren't about strength alone. They're about who understands weight transfer first. And just as forward force surged again, the smallest pivot began to form, subtle, precise, decisive. When power builds steadily like a wave, is the real advantage in resisting it or guiding where it breaks? The surge came without warning, not reckless, but committed. The 400-pound sumo wrestler stepped in with full intention this time. His hips drove forward, feet gripping the mat with practiced authority. This wasn't exploratory pressure anymore. This was engagement, the kind designed to collapse space completely. For a fraction of a second, it looked inevitable. Mass moving with direction is intimidating. It compresses distance. It steals air from the room. The spectators felt it. That quiet internal flinch when something heavy accelerates towards something lighter. Chest almost connected. Balance nearly forced upright. And then the shift. Keanu Reeves didn't push back. He pivoted. His lead. Foot rotated outward. His hips turned just enough to move off the central line of force. One hand redirected the upper body while the other guided the arm slightly downward. It wasn't dramatic. It was structural. The sumo wrestler's forward drive, once aimed straight ahead, suddenly found no direct resistance. Instead of meeting a wall, it encountered an angle. Momentum doesn't disappear when redirected. It continues, just not where intended. As the larger man committed his weight fully forward, his base momentarily narrowed. His rear foot lifted. To advance, hips pushing through for dominance. That's when timing mattered most. Reeves lowered his center of gravity at the exact moment the forward weight peaked. Not earlier, not later, right at the crest. A subtle off-balancing pull combined with a rotational shift. The force that was meant to overwhelm now had nowhere stable to land. Gasps filled the room. Not because someone was struck, but because physics had just changed direction. The sumo wrestler's balance broke forward. Not violently, not catastrophically, but enough. Enough for leverage to take control. The pivot continued. The guiding hand adjusted. The larger athlete's own momentum assisted the motion. And then, the throw. Controlled, clean, technical. Not a slam, not an aggressive dump. A redirection of mass that placed the larger body onto the mat with measured force. The sound wasn't explosive. It was heavy, a deep thud that echoed through the room. Silence followed. For one full second, nobody moved. The sumo wrestler rolled immediately, recovering posture. There was no disorientation, no injury, just surprise, not at being defeated, but at how efficiently momentum had been used against him. Reeves stepped back instantly, hands open, no celebration, no expression of triumph, just composure. The larger man rose, adjusted his stance, and nodded. Because he understood exactly what had happened. This wasn't brute strength overcoming mass. It was timing meeting commitment. Observers exhaled collectively. What they had just witnessed wasn't cinematic exaggeration. There were no dramatic flips or unrealistic lifts. The technique didn't rely on lifting 400 pounds into the air. It relied on borrowing direction. That's the difference most people miss. Leverage doesn't fight weight. It guides it. And for that brief moment, everyone in the room saw the principle unfold in real time. Power had surged forward with confidence. Precision had waited patiently. When the commitment peaked, adaptation stepped in. No ego, no humiliation. The sumo wrestler didn't look embarrassed. He looked analytical, because practitioners don't see moments like that as losses. They see them as information. The two men reset, back to stance, back to distance. But the atmosphere had changed. Earlier, there had been quiet laughter. Now, there was focused respect. The shift wasn't about someone hitting harder. It was about someone adjusting faster. And that realization lingered longer than the throw itself. Because the crowd didn't gasp at domination. They gasped at efficiency, at the realization that under the right timing, even overwhelming force can become its own vulnerability. The exchange had lasted only seconds, but it altered the narrative completely. Not size versus skill, not strength versus weakness, but commitment versus control. And in that brief turning point, one principle stood clear. Force that moves in a straight line is powerful. Force that meets the right angle becomes guided. The room remained quiet as both men prepared to continue. Different systems, different builds, same discipline. But now, everyone watching understood something deeper. Mass can intimidate. Momentum can overwhelm. But when timing aligns with structure, even the heaviest surge can be redirected. By the time short clips began circulating online, the story had already changed. Headlines exaggerated, captions dramatized, comments divided into predictable camps. Some claimed the 400-pound sumo wrestler had been embarrassed. Others insisted the moment was staged. A few framed it as proof that one style destroys another. But the people who were actually in the room described something very different. There was no humiliation, no shouting, no dominance display. Just a technical exchange that unfolded exactly the way controlled martial arts sessions are supposed to unfold. With intensity, but also restraint. The throw that made everyone gasp lasted seconds. What lasted longer was what happened after. The sumo wrestler stood up immediately, adjusted his stance, and nodded. Not forced, not performative, natural, the kind of acknowledgement practitioners give when they recognize timing well executed. Keanu Reeves didn't raise his hands, didn't smirk, didn't look toward the crowd for validation. He simply reset, and that detail matters, because internet narratives often ignore context in favor of conflict. Clips cut before the bow. Clips cut before the reset. Clips cut before the mutual respect. What they highlight instead is impact, the visual moment where mass meets the mat. But here's what most viewers misunderstand. In controlled sessions like this, participants allow engagement to develop far enough to test principles, not far enough to cause injury. The sumo wrestler increased pressure deliberately. Reeves redirected deliberately. Neither attempted to escalate recklessly. This wasn't a street altercation. It wasn't a professional bout with a referee and scorecards. It was a technical conversation between two different systems, and conversations have exchanges, not winners. Another misconception spread quickly. That size had been proven irrelevant. That's not accurate either. Mass is a genuine advantage. Forward pressure from a grounded athlete of that size is real. The reason the throw worked wasn't because weight doesn't matter. It worked because commitment creates momentum. And momentum, if misaligned, can be redirected. That's a nuance social media rarely slows down to appreciate. Some commenters argued that the throw wouldn't work in real life. Others argued it proved technique always beats strength. Both extremes miss the point. Technique without timing fails. Strength without balance fails. The session demonstrated something far more mature than rivalry. It demonstrated adaptation. Observers described how the energy shifted after the throw. The early laughter disappeared, but not in an embarrassed way. It transformed into focus. The sumo wrestler adjusted his approach in subsequent exchanges. Shorter surges, better angle awareness, more controlled entries. Reeves adjusted too, respecting the grounded stability and avoiding overcommitment. 32. Intensity remained controlled. No one attempted to get even. No one attempted to escalate the moment for pride, and that's what separates disciplined practitioners from viral dramatics. The internet prefers a clean narrative. Big man loses. Underdog wins. Ego crushed. Lesson learned. Reality is less cinematic. Reality is iterative. 2 trained individuals test, adapt, and refine. No scoreboard needed. Another thing people got wrong was assuming the initial comment about size difference was malicious. Those in attendance described it as light humor, the kind common in training rooms. In martial arts environments, teasing often exists alongside respect. It's not hostility, it's part of human interaction under pressure. But online, tone disappears. A smirk becomes arrogance. A nod becomes defeat. A reset becomes retreat. Context collapses. And once context collapses, imagination fills the gap. Yet the most important detail was visible in body language. After the throw, the sumo wrestler didn't show frustration. He didn't storm off. He didn't attempt to overpower recklessly in retaliation. He recalibrated, and recalibration is not weakness, it's professionalism. Likewise, Reeves didn't chase the moment. He didn't attempt a second dramatic throw for effect. He didn't press forward aggressively to capitalize on applause. He maintained composure. That composure told the real story. Because if this were about proving superiority, escalation would have followed. Instead, what followed was refinement. Pressure adjusted. Angles corrected. Distance respected. The crowd, which initially expected spectacle, began appreciating detail instead. They stopped reacting loudly and started observing closely. That's the part no viral clip captures. The quiet respect that settles after skill is demonstrated without ego. In the end, nobody left the room saying, "He destroyed him." They left saying, "That was clean." And in martial arts culture, clean carries weight. It means controlled, it means technical, it means effective without excess. The story online became about victory, but the reality inside the room was about principle. Mass applied pressure. Precision redirected it. Both walked away sharper, and maybe that's what frustrates the internet most. There was no humiliation to celebrate, no rivalry to fuel, no ego collapse to replay, just 2 disciplined individuals proving that growth doesn't require someone to lose. Why do we rush to label moments as wins and losses, when sometimes they're simply lessons unfolding in real time? When the intensity eased, something unexpected happened. The energy in the room didn't spike, it settled. The sumo wrestler stepped back into stance one final time, then relaxed his shoulders. His breathing slowed naturally. No visible frustration. No forced grin to hide disappointment. Just composure. Across from him, Keanu Reeves mirrored that calm. Hands lowered, posture neutral, eyes steady. They bowed again, and in that bow was the part most viewers never see when clips are trimmed for drama, respect, not the theatrical kind, not the exaggerated showmanship kind, the quiet, professional kind. Because what had just happened wasn't about proving who was superior, it was about pressure revealing structure. In martial arts, controlled sessions exist for one purpose: exposure without destruction. You apply force to discover weaknesses, not to humiliate, but to improve. The sumo wrestler applied authentic forward pressure. That alone requires confidence. Committing. Mass, even in a safe environment, means trusting your own balance and the control of your partner. Reeves redirected that pressure with timing. That requires restraint. It's easy to escalate, harder to stay measured. The real lesson wasn't in the throw. It was in the decision not to escalate after it. Because escalation is instinct. Control is discipline. After the pivotal moment, both adjusted. The larger athlete shortened his entries, tightened his stance, refined his angle awareness. He didn't abandon his strength. He sharpened its delivery. Reeves, in turn, became more conservative with distance, respecting how quickly pressure could close space. He didn't chase another dramatic redirection. He focused on stability. That mutual adjustment is growth, and growth rarely goes viral. What people often misunderstand about martial arts is that dominance is not the ultimate goal. Longevity is. Injuries shorten careers. Ego-driven sparring destroys training rooms. True practitioners understand that walking away healthy and wiser is a victory. The sumo wrestler could have tried to overpower recklessly after being redirected. He didn't. Reeves could have tried to repeat the throw for effect. He didn't. Both chose refinement over pride. That choice is what separates performance from practice. In many ways, the lesson extends beyond the mat. Most confrontations in life follow a similar pattern. Pressure arrives, momentum builds. Instinct says, push back harder. But sometimes the smarter response isn't resistance. It's redirection. When someone argues, aggressively, meeting force with force rarely produces clarity. When stress builds at work, doubling intensity without adjusting structure often leads to burnout. The principles demonstrated on that mat apply everywhere. Lower your center. Adjust your angle. Don't absorb force directly if you can guide it safely. Control does not mean weakness. It means awareness. Another overlooked lesson was humility. Neither participant needed validation. The sumo wrestler's reputation wasn't defined by one redirection. Reeves' discipline wasn't validated by one clean throw. Both understood that a single exchange doesn't define mastery. Mastery is cumulative. It's built in repetitions, nobody films, hours of drilling footwork, years of refining balance, countless sessions of incremental improvement. The throw simply revealed preparation, and preparation is invisible until tested. That's why the room felt different afterward. Earlier, there was curiosity, then tension, then surprise. Finally, understanding. Observers began discussing technique instead of outcome. They spoke about timing windows, about hip rotation, about center of gravity transitions. The narrative shifted from who won to how did that work? That shift is maturity, because mature audiences appreciate process. The two men shook hands briefly before stepping off the mat. No speeches, no dramatic declarations, just a nod that said everything necessary. Strength had been acknowledged. Precision had been acknowledged, and neither diminished the other. In a culture obsessed with viral humiliation, that restraint felt almost radical. But perhaps that's why the moment resonated. It reminded people that power doesn't need noise, that skill doesn't require spectacle, and that the highest level of martial arts isn't domination, it's control under pressure. The real shock wasn't that a larger man was redirected, it was that neither man tried to turn it into something bigger than it was. They understood something simple. You don't prove mastery by crushing someone. You prove it by staying composed when you could escalate and choosing not to. And maybe that's the lesson most worth carrying forward. When pressure enters your life, do you meet it with ego, or do you meet it with structure and control? By the time the session ended, the atmosphere in the room felt completely different from how it began. Earlier, there had been quiet amusement, curiosity about size, whispers about weight difference, assumptions built on appearance. Now, there was something else. Respect. Not just between the two men on the mat, but among the people watching. The 400-pound sumo wrestler gathered his things calmly. No visible frustration, no need to justify anything. His movements were steady, professional, grounded, exactly how he had entered. Across the mat, Keanu Reeves remained understated as always. No dramatic exit, no lingering for attention. Just another bow, another quiet acknowledgement, and a step back into the background. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would have had no idea something viral had just occurred. Because nothing about it felt sensational, and maybe that's why it resonated so strongly afterward. In today's world, conflict spreads faster than context. Short clips reward impact, not discipline. Headlines reward exaggeration, not nuance. But what made this moment powerful wasn't the throw itself. It was everything surrounding it. The restraint, the composure, the absence of ego. People online debated endlessly. Technique beats size. Strength always wins in reality. It was staged. It was domination. Yet those debates missed the deeper takeaway. The session wasn't about disproving strength. It wasn't about glorifying agility. It was about demonstrating that different systems can meet without hostility, that two practitioners from different backgrounds can test each other without needing a loser. The sumo wrestler represented grounded force, stability, forward pressure, tradition built around mass and momentum. Reeves represented adaptive movement, timing, leverage, structural redirection developed through years of disciplined training. Neither system was invalidated. Neither was exposed as inferior. Instead, both revealed their nature. Force commits, precision waits, momentum builds, timing decides. That's not a story about victory. It's a story about balance. The crowd's gasp wasn't about humiliation. It was about expectation breaking. People expect larger bodies to dominate smaller ones. They expect weight to automatically equal control. When that expectation is disrupted, even briefly, it forces reconsideration. And reconsideration is uncomfortable, because it challenges assumptions. But here's the deeper truth. The throw worked because it happened at the exact moment of commitment. Had the timing been early, it would have failed. Had it been late, it would have failed. Had the larger athlete adjusted differently, the outcome may have changed. Moments like that are fragile. They're not guarantees, they're windows. And mastery is about recognizing windows under pressure. That's the part that rarely trends. We live in a culture that frames everything as binary. Winner, loser, dominant, defeated. But real growth doesn't operate in binaries, it operates in layers. The sumo wrestler left with sharper awareness of angle vulnerability. Reeves left with reinforced respect for grounded mass. Both left improved. That's the outcome that matters. Not who hit harder, not who landed cleaner, but who adapted. If there's something viral about this story, it isn't the physical exchange, it's the emotional maturity displayed afterward. No trash talk for clicks, no dramatic rematch announcement, no attempt to milk the moment for narrative control. Just two individuals demonstrating what martial arts is supposed to represent: self-control, continuous learning, humility under spotlight. In a world where confrontation often escalates for attention, watching two skilled individuals choose discipline feels rare, almost disruptive. And maybe that's the real reason people keep replaying the clip. They sense something different in it, something steady, something grounded. Strength without arrogance. Skill without noise, confidence without humiliation. The size difference made the moment dramatic, but the restraint made it meaningful. When the lights dimmed and the room emptied, there was no trophy, no belt exchange, no official verdict, just a memory of a clean redirection and two respectful bows. And maybe that's enough, because not every powerful moment needs a clear winner. Sometimes the highest level of victory is walking away composed. Sometimes the real flex isn't overpowering someone, it's proving you don't need to.